The land of Arabia is mainly associated with Islam, and there's a reason for that. Islam sparked the tremendous expansion of the Arabic people in history. The Islamic Caliphate, which at its height spanned Spain and North Africa in the west to Central Asia and the Indian Subcontinent in the east, was arguably the most powerful empire of its time because of this. While Islam continues to be one of the world's most significant political and social forces, the Caliphate remained one of the world's most dominant political, military, scientific, and cultural centers for several centuries. But what existed before Islam? What did the Arab people believe in? How did they live? And how did they rule themselves? Political conditions. The most unbelievable factor in the political life of Arabs was that there was no systematic political organization in the Arabian Peninsula. No part of the region except Yemen had any form of government at all, as besides the authority of their tribal chiefs, the Arabs never accepted any other power or control over them. These tribal chiefs were selected, and their authority was retained on moral values rather than political authority. It is astonishing to know that the people of Arabia lived for centuries without any governance. As a result, there was no law and order in the region. There was lawlessness, and people usually took laws into their own hands to implement justice. Vengeance was a common practice. If someone did wrong to another person, a conflict would start and continue over generations. As there were no courts, no police, and no law and order, the people's only protection from their enemies was their tribes. Tribes needed to offer protection to their members even if they had committed crimes. If a tribe failed to provide protection to its people, it was considered a disgrace, and the tribe was mocked. Seeing that the Arabs were anarchists, and they did not have a government or systematic control over them, war was commonplace. Tribes would always be in a state of conflict and warfare. Everyone was the enemy of everyone. War was the primary source of population control in Arab society, as the resources of the desert could only provide to a limited number of people. The Arabs, however, saw the war from a different perspective. They saw war as a source of recreation, and it was like a hobby or sport for them, where the audience could enjoy and get away with the tiring and grinding life of the desert for some time. As a result, they sought the excitement of a battle. They were able to demonstrate their abilities in horsemanship, fencing, and archery during the war. They could also distinguish themselves in combat by their heroism and win glory and honor for their tribes simultaneously. Whether or not there was a cause to ignite a war, the Arabs frequently engaged in combat just for the sake of fighting. According to the Austrian historian and Arabist G.E. Grunebaum, in the century before the rise of Islam, the tribes dissipated all their energies in tribal guerrilla fighting, all against all. Most Arabs were nomads and earned their livelihood through cattle. Some of the Arabs were involved in farming, while the most important source of livelihood for Arabs was raiding and plundering the caravans that took the desert route. Most people in the small settlements would pay a fixed amount to these looters in order to avoid their attacks. The Arab population comprised of two main divisions, nomadic and sedentary. Southern Arabia and Hijaz had many small and some large towns that had settlements, while the rest of the Arabs had a floating population of Bedouins. The Bedouins lacked political and civil advancement. However, they were a source of fear and danger for the settlements. These nomads were pirates, and their livelihood evolved around looting the caravans and sedentary population. The Bedouins were anarchic and were notorious for their devotion to tribes. There were some significant tribes that exercised power in respective areas of the region. Quraysh was the superior tribe in Makkah. In Medina, formerly known as Yathrib, the dominant tribes were the Arab tribes of Aus and Khazraj, and the Jewish tribes of Kainuka, Nadir, and Qurayza. Certain traits shared were arrogance, narcissism, boastfulness, vengeance, and an excessive desire to plunder. Their failure to establish their own state was in part due to their arrogance. They lacked political discipline and never recognized any authority as supreme in Arabia prior to Islam's rise. They acknowledged a man's authority to lead them into a foray. Still, he was only able to compel their obedience if they were sure they would get their fair share of the spoils, and his authority ended once the expedition was over. Economic conditions. Economically, Arabs were led by the Jews. They were the owners of the most fertile lands in the region of Hijaz and the prime agriculturalists there. They were also the owners of the industries that existed at that time in Arabia and were the sole owners of the ordnance industry. Slavery was also an important source of the economy in Arabia. Men and women were sold and bought like cattle, and were the people of the most miserable class in Arab society. The most authoritative class of society comprised people who were moneylenders and capitalists. The lenders set up a sky-high and unreasonable amount of interest that was specifically designed to make the debt payers poorer and poorer and the moneylenders richer over time. The principal metropolitan centers of Arab origin were located in Hijaz, Yathrib, and Makkah. The citizens of Makkah were mainly traders, merchants, and moneylenders. They traveled in groups for their business to Yemen in winter and to Syria in summer. These caravans also used to travel to Bahrain and Iraq. These trades were an important factor in the Arabian economy and required the utmost skill, ability, and experience. The departure and arrival of caravans were important in the lives of the people of Makkah, as most of them invested in something and waited to get their returns. In Yathrib, whereas, agriculture was the main source of living for the Arabs, and Jews made their livelihood as industrialists and businessmen. However, the Jews were not exclusively industrialists and businessmen. They were also farmers who were experts in their fields and utilized a lot of barren land for cultivation. So ultimately, Hijaz was the most notable province of Arab in the 7th century. Social conditions. Arabia was a patriarchal society where women enjoyed no equality and had no status, as they were only considered objects for pleasure. In Arabia, the number of wives that a man could have was not fixed, so that any man could have as many wives as he wanted. When a man died in Arabia, all his wives, except his own mother, were inherited by his son. There was a devastating tradition in Arabia to bury infant daughters alive. When a daughter was born into a family, the father had to bury her, even if he didn't want to, because of keeping up with society and customs, and because of social pressure. Overindulgence was completely normalized in Arab society. The wickedness of drunkenness was usual in Arabia. They were also fond of gambling. Sex work was also common, as many women sold sex to earn their livelihood because there was little they could do besides selling sex. In his book Milestones, Egypt's Sayyid Qutb quotes Imam Bukhari, a well-known traditionalist, on the practice of marriage in Arabia prior to Islam. The Shihab as-Suri stated, according to Urwa b. az-Zubayr, Aisha, the Prophet, God bless and keep him, told him that there were 4 kinds of marriage in the Jahiliyyah. One was the modern practice of marrying people, in which one man weds his ward or daughter to another man who then grants her a dowry, bride wealth, and weds her. One more sort was where a man told his better half, when she was refined from her periods, go to him, a specific person, and request to exchange in sexual relations with him, until it becomes clear that she is pregnant from the other man with whom she sought intercourse. Her husband would not even come close to her or touch her. Her husband can have sexual relations with her when it is obvious that she is pregnant. He simply does this out of a wish for a noble child. This kind of marriage was referred to as nikah al-istibda, or the marriage of seeking sex. Another kind occurred when a group, rat, of fewer than 10 men visited the same woman and were required to have sexual relations with her. She sent for them if she became pregnant, and gave birth after some nights had passed, and no man would turn her down. She would say to them, you, when they gathered in her presence, you clearly know this is the result of your actions, he is your child, whom I have given birth to, naming anyone she chooses after him. The man couldn't say no to her child's attachment to him. The 4th kind was when numerous men approached a lady, and she didn't keep herself away from any man who came to her. These were the sex workers, women called baghaya. They used to put up banners that looked like signs at their doors. They were taken by whoever wanted them. They gathered around her and called the physiognomists if one of them conceived and had a child. They then gave her child to the man they thought was her father, and the child stayed with him and was called his son. They had no problem with this because it was possible. At the point when Muhammad, God favor and safeguard him, came teaching reality, he obliterated every one of the sorts of marriage of the Jahiliyyah with the exception of that which individuals practice today. Religious conditions. The period before the birth of Islam in Arab history is known as Jahiliyyah, or the times of ignorance. The center of the Arab, Makkah, was the house of the most sacred place for the Muslims, the Holy Kaaba, which is classically known to have been built by the Prophet Abraham for the worship of one God. However, most Arabs were pagans. It is known that Arabs were the devotees of several religions that can be categorized as polytheists. The majority population of Arabia was idol worshippers. Various idols were worshipped by the people of Arabia, and every tribe in Arab had an idol or many idols of its own. These people had turned the Kaaba, built by Abraham, into a heathen pantheon with 360 wooden and stone idols. Atheists. A number of people in Arabia were atheists. This group had people who were materialists, and they had the conception that the world was everlasting. Zindiqs. These people believed in the duality of nature. They believed that there was one god for good and one for evil, and both of these gods were continuously fighting to get the ultimate power and control. Jews. Many Jews relocated to the Hijaz in Arabia after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD and drove them out of Syria and Palestine. Additionally, many Arabs converted to Judaism as a result of their influence. The towns of Yathrib, Khyber, Fadak, and ul-Qura served as their main centers. Christians. The northern Arabian tribe of Ghassan had been converted to Christianity by the Romans. Ghassan clans had moved to Hijaz and settled there. In Yemen, where the Ethiopian invaders initially introduced the creed, there were numerous Christians in the south. The town of Najran was their stronghold. Monotheists. These people were relatively minor in number. They did not worship idols, and they believed in one God only. They were the followers of the religion of Prophet Abraham. Most family members of the Prophet Muhammad and his clan, Banu Hashim, were monotheists. Education. Before the advent of Islam, it was rare for any Arab to know how to read and write. Most Arabs were not enthusiasts of learning these skills. A number of historians argue that the culture of that era is entirely oral, and the Jews and Christians were the record keepers. The most prominent achievement of Arabs was their poetry. They used to claim that they were bestowed with poetry and eloquence. Arab poetry is considered one of the essential sources of knowing Arab culture and history. Poetry lost its status as Arabia's queen of the arts when Islam took over, and prose took the place of poetry for a while. Al-Quran al-Majid, the Islamic scripture, was Islam's most remarkable composition and was written in prose. Muslims hold the belief that the Quran was first revealed to Muhammad, the messenger of God, when it was composed in heaven. They believe that human genius will never be able to produce anything that can match its content or style. For 50 generations, it has served as a model for literary, philosophical, theological, legal, metaphysical, and mystical thought. If you're a history fanatic like us, watch this video as well.